I'm gonna level with y'all for a little bit before I get into the thick of this video. I originally, when I was sitting down to plan this particular video and covering my year in review, I had very much dreaded trying to think about putting the pieces of planning what I was going to present in this video, because I would have had to basically tell y'all that I drastically failed in my reading challenge for 2023. Considering my initial goal was 100 books, and I ended up only completing about 36 books according to Goodreads, which I did not do a great job of tracking my reads on Goodreads this past year. I think if I had to guess in terms of how many actual books I did read for 2023, it would have been about 45, but it was still well below half of what I wanted to do. Then I realized, thinking about some of the other things that I was doing in 2023 to account for everything, the reason why my reading year wasn't the best wasn't just for events. It was the fact that I was doing so many other different things in 2023 of traveling different places. In terms of gaming, I had a really big gaming year in 2023. At bare minimum, 65 different games in 2023. So that, if that tells you where my time was for 2023, like, it was a roller coaster year in terms of things that were occupying my time. At least that made me feel a little bit better going into this video. So now I feel like I can actually talk about this and just kind of tell you my stats, so that this is what I read for 2023. I'm going to do the best of and most disappointing reads and worst books all in one video. So this is one-stop shop. Basically going to do all of the reading things for 2023 in this video. So let's go ahead and get into it. Hi everyone, my name is Rose, also known as TA Summers. Welcome back to my channel. Today's video is going to be the year in review for my reading for 2023. That means everything related to reading is in this video for the overarching picture. So that means best of, worst of, most disappointing. All of this is going to be in the same video. And you might be surprised, because you're thinking, like, Rose, you did multiple videos of this in 2022. Why is it being condensed into one for this particular year, the year overview for 2023? I'll tell you why, because I did not read that many books in 2023, to be blunt about it. As in terms of the number of books that I read per my tracking on Goodreads for 2023, it was a total of 36 books. Which I know that's wrong, because I know that I've read more than that. Counting reread books, it would have been about 45 books. But even then, that was well below the 100 books that I had slated for 2023. And like, all in all, I did massively fail on my reading challenge, but I feel a little bit better about it, knowing that when I was going into the planning of this video, just looking at some of the other different things that I was doing in 2023, that I had my time taken up. And it wasn't just like, just life events. Like, there were other, like, more positive things that I was doing in 2023 for, like, in terms of occupying my time. I traveled a lot between different places. With family, being able to visit family. There are other things that I was able to do, such as gaming. I had a really big gaming year in 2023, and I may decide to kind of do a separate video in terms of what I was able to do for gaming, to talk about that just in a separate conversation. But since this is book related, I'm going to focus on what I was able to do for books. And I'm going to just give you some brief stats based on the books that I tracked for 2023 on Goodreads. So let's go ahead and dive into it. First things first, in terms of the different genres and age groups that I read for 2023, in terms of all the 36 books that I read, 3 of those books were adult nonfiction, 4 of them were graphic novels, and 1 of them was based on true events. 1 manga, which, if y'all know how dedicated I am to manga titles and manga reading and things like that, having only read 1 manga in the whole of 2023 is well below what I'm able to do. So that kind of tells you how much my time was taken up in 2023 in terms of reading. I'm hoping that in 2024 that I'll be able to pick up way more titles in terms of things and give you my thoughts on everything once I have the opportunity to do so. For adult fiction titles, I read a total of 18. And for young adult titles, I read a total of 13. For some of the genre breakdowns, 7 of books were considered to be sci-fi fantasy, either sci-fi or fantasy. 7 of those were considered chiefly to be romance. 2 of them can be considered horror, and 1 of them kind of crosses into multiple genres a little bit. So yeah, like I counted 2 as horror. 10 of the books that I picked up were rereads, which is interesting. I had a really big rereading year, was able to really enjoy my experience with that. And 7 of the books that I picked up were books that were actually published in the year of 2023 that I picked up. So that kind of gives you an overview of that. The average number of pages that I read, according to Goodreads, was 250. And my overall average rating between all of these books was 4 out of 5 stars. So in all, in terms of the books that I picked up for 2023, the vast majority of them I really enjoyed. Probably what I'm going to do is I'm going to list out all of the books, all of the books that I had the opportunity to read and rate on Goodreads in this next section, and then in the section after will be my best of, most disappointing, and worst of. So let's go ahead and dive into it. So this is going to be the section of the video where I am going to read out every title and every rating for every book that I've marked as read on Goodreads for the year of 2023. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into it. It's a list of 36 books. While I'm not giving my thoughts on every book that is contained in this particular section of the video, some of these are books that I've have dedicated reviews on the channel already, and some of them are forthcoming, but I'll let you know and kind of chronicle for the ones that have not been posted to my channel quite yet in terms of what I read in 2023. They'll be coming, as well as dedicated reviews that are going to be on my blog as well. So let's just go ahead and dive in. Starting off the year 2023, I first finished reading Book of Night by Holly Black. I gave that 2 out of 5 stars. Second book that I read was Five Survive by Holly Jackson. That is YA. I gave that 3.5 out of 5 stars. Third book that I read in 2023 was Eden Robinson's Return of the Trickster. That is the 3rd book in the Trickster trilogy. I gave that 4 out of 5 stars, and that is YA. Fourth book that I read in 2023 was The Other Black Girl by Zakiya Dahlia Harris. I gave that 1.5 out of 5 stars, and that is adult fiction. Fifth book that I read in 2023 was Ain't Burned All the Bright by Jason Reynolds and Jason Griffin. That is a young adult book, and it was nominated for the Caldecott Medal in 2023. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. It is also a novel that is written in verse. The sixth book that I read in 2023 was Natsuki Kizu's Given, the 7th volume of manga. I gave that 3.5 out of 5 stars. The next book that I read in 2023 was a reread, Yours All Along by Ronnie Lauren. It is part of the Loving on the Edge series, and it's considered to be between books 7 and 8. So I on Goodreads, they have it marked as 7.5. But this was a novella, and I gave this a total of 2 out of 5 stars. And this is considered to be an adult male-male romance, GLBTQ romance. The next book that I read was a reread, All Systems Red, first book in the Murderbot Diaries by Martha Wells. I gave this a total of 4.5 out of 5 stars. Next book was a reread. This is a YA paranormal book, Sweet Whispers, Brother Rush by Virginia Hamilton. I gave this book 3.5 out of 5 stars. Next book that I read was The Sunbearer Trials by Aiden Thomas. And I gave this book, this YA fantasy book, 4.5 out of 5 stars. Next book that I read was a reread from the previous year, but I reread it in 2023. A Night Shift novella. This is the third book in the Night Shift series, Faded Memories by Christina C. Jones. And I gave this, I believe, 4.5 out of 5 stars, if I remember correctly. Yes, 4.5 out of 5 stars. Next book that I read was a YA graphic novel, Banned Book Club by Kim Hyung-suk, Ryan Estrada, and Ko Hyung-ju. I gave this a total of 4.5 out of 5 stars. The next book that I read was The Last Thing He Told Me by Laura Day. I gave this 3.5 out of 5 stars, and this is adult fiction. I actually really enjoyed this a lot more than I thought I was going to for this mystery thriller, and I haven't seen the Apple TV series quite yet, but my sister has. We might consider doing something for that in terms of reflecting and talking about our thoughts in terms of perceiving the series, but we'll see how things go. But that was a pretty solid read. Next book that I read was Artificial Condition by Martha Wells. This is the second book in the Murderbot Diary. I reread this for 2023 and I gave it a total of 4.5 out of 5 stars. Next book that I read was The Black Queen by Jemima Mill, and this was YA horror mystery. I gave this 2 out of 5 stars, correction for that. Next book that I read was a YA romance, I Kissed Shara Wheeler by Casey McQuiston. This was a very interesting young adult rom-com. I gave this a total of 3 out of 5 stars. Very strong 3 out of 5 stars. Next book that I read was a reread, and this is considered a YA classic in many circles. I reread Monster by Walter Dean Myers. I gave this a strong 4 out of 5 stars. It was great to be able to come back to this. Next book that I read was Happy Place by Emily Henry. I gave this a solid 3.5 out of 5 stars, and this is considered an adult romance. Next book that I read was 19 Minutes by Jodi Picoult. This was a reread and an adult fiction title. No, 4 out of 5 stars for 19 Minutes by Jodi Picoult. Next book that I read was the third book in the Murderbot Diaries series, Rogue Protocol by Martha Wells. I gave this a solid 4 out of 5 stars. Next book that I read was also a reread. I reread Exit Strategy, the fourth book in the Murderbot Diaries series by Martha Wells. I gave this a total of 5 stars out of 5 stars. So I loved this conclusion to the original quartet of the Murderbot Diaries series. I wanted to reread the Murderbot Diaries series in general to be able to catch up with the series to the latest release that released late last year. Next book that I read was The Ballad of Black Tom by Victor LaValle. I gave this a total of 4.5 out of 5 stars. Excellent horror novella that is absolutely one of my favorites from this past year that I picked up. Next book that I read was Tilly Walden's Are You Listening? Graphic novel. I gave this a solid 4 out of 5 stars. Next, I read The Valentine's Do-Over by Michelle Lindo Rice. I gave this a solid 4 out of 5 stars. Really sweet, really cute adult romance from Harlequin, and I really enjoyed that. I hope to have a dedicated review of The Valentine's Do-Over posted to my channel as soon as I possibly can. Next book that I read was Batman's Volume 11, The Fall and the Fallen. This was done by Tom King, Mikhail Janine, and Tony S. Daniel. I rated this a total of 3 out of 5 stars. I thought it was a pretty solid entry, though I feel like there were certain pieces of it that felt disjointed for presentation, though it was a solid read for me. Next book that I read was The Scourge Between Stars by Ness Brown. I gave this 4.5 out of 5 stars. Wonderful space set horror novella from Ness Brown, and I hope to read more from the author in the future as well, but it was one of my favorite reads for this past year as well. Next book that I read was Lisa McMahon's Bang. I gave this 2.5 out of 5 stars. Next book after that I read was Daughters of Jubilation by Carolee Cawthron. I gave this 5 out of 5 stars. Definitely one of my favorites from this past year that I was able to pick up. Next, I read The Fire Next Door by James Baldwin. I gave this a solid 4.5 out of 5 stars. Next book that I read was Carrie Soto is Back by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I gave this a solid 4 out of 5 stars. And that's adult fiction. Next book that I read was a reread, a YA classic thriller, Death Watch by Rob White. I gave this a solid 3.5 out of 5 stars. Next book that I read was The Challenge by Megan Hart. This is an adult erotic romance short. I gave this a total of 1.5 out of 5 stars. Next book after that I read was Britney Spears' The Woman in Me. I gave this a solid 4.5 out of 5 stars. Really well done memoir from Britney Spears and one of my favorite reads this past year. Next book that I read was Minor Detail by Adania Shibley. Originally, I think I gave this 4 out of 5 stars, but I bumped it up to 4.5 out of 5 stars. Next book that I read was Disentangling from Emotionally Immature People by Lindsay C. Gibson. This was a nonfiction book that I picked up, and I've read several other books from Lindsay C. Gibson in the same line of books talking about emotionally immature people. I gave this 4.5 out of 5 stars. It was a pretty solid read. And then the last book that I read in 2023, and it ended on a very strong note, was Yellowface by R.F. Kuang. I gave this 4 out of 5 stars. I might actually bump this up to 4.5 out of 5 stars because I thought it was very well done for what it offered, and I can definitely see why it was chosen as best fiction book for the Goodreads Choice Awards for 2023. So having gone through all of the books that I read for 2023, you might be wondering, okay, Rose, what would you consider to be your best of, your most disappointing, and worst of list? And it's really not that much in terms of things. Like for the best of the books that I previously listed for this, I have a list of 7 books that I left unranked. And I think these make sense. Even if you watch my mid-year wrap up last year in 2023, I think this list looks pretty consistent with some of the books that I really enjoyed from early on in the year. But we're going to do this list of 7 kind of like just brief rapid fire. I'm just going to go ahead and dive into it. So the first couple of books that I'm going to mention are ones that I have dedicated reviews of on the channel. You can watch that video because I highlight those 2 books in the same video. It would be Minor Detail by Adania Shibley and The Woman in Me by Britney Spears. And I really appreciated both of those books for what they offer. For The Woman in Me, I thought it was a very well done portrait of Britney Spears' life in kind of like an overarching picture of what she went through, and being told in a way that was very authentic to Britney Spears and her experience. I know it's not likely to be the only book that Britney Spears writes per her experience, but I thought that was a great starting point for things. And then Minor Detail by Adania Shibley was a read that was very emotionally heavy to be able to peruse, because part of it is based on a true story of a 15-year-old Palestinian girl who was raped and murdered by a set of Israeli soldiers, and that is chronicled in the first part of the book. And the second part of the book is meant to be from the perspective of a woman 25 years after the Nakba, where she is investigating a minor detail and going into occupied territory to be able to determine the root of that minor detail. and and the parallel between both parts of those stories in terms of the way that tied together was so masterfully done by Donna Shibley that it, without a shadow of a doubt, it was one of my favorite reads of 2023. And I feel like it was a great jumping point into reading even more Palestinian authors, and I'm planning on doing that in 2024. I wish that Adana Shibley had been able to have the stage at the Frankfurt Book Fair to showcase the honor that she got for Minor Detail. And just I talk about it a little bit more in the video in terms of what happened with that, but I hope to be able to pick up more of the author's works in the future. Another book that I would say that has not actually made it to this to my best of list for 2023, because it was the very last read that I had in 2023, was Yellow Face by R.F. Kuang. That was a pleasant surprise for me in terms of picking up that book for 2023, because the way that it deals with its dark humor to provide critiques of the writing industry in terms of how it treats Asian authors and Asian writings, and the way that it was done in such a strong, interesting voice, was a highlight of like my reading year in terms of things. I really enjoyed what it chose to do. I am going to have a full dedicated review of Yellow Face on my channel to come. And I have written a review of it on Goodreads already, but I thought it was so well done. So that is definitely one of my favorite books and best books of 2023. Another one that I will say that was among my favorites of 2023 was this adult horror, which it's not the first book that I've read by Victor LaValle, but it's definitely one that stood out in my mind, and I'm very much looking forward to the follow-up. The Ballad of Black Tom by Victor LaValle was definitely one of my favorites, and I talked about it on the channel before in terms of how I thought it was so masterfully done for the way that it portrayed its respective character in terms of the magic, in terms of a deal gone wrong, and things that transpire in that particular novella. I thought it was masterfully done, and it was definitely one of my favorite reads of 2023. Another of my favorite reads was The Sunbearer Trials by Aiden Thomas. I absolutely adore that YA fantasy book, just very well done. I talked about it on the channel before, but I would definitely say that was among my highlights, especially in YA fiction, in terms of what I was able to pick up in 2023. That definitely stood out to me, and it cements the fact that I think Aiden Thomas is definitely one of my favorite YA authors in terms of being able to watch what Aiden does in terms of future releases. So definitely looking forward to reading the follow-up for the Sunbearer Trials as well. And I think the cover for the follow-up to the Sunbearer Trials just recently came out. You can see a picture of it here, which I'm really excited. We'll see how things go, and I'm definitely looking forward to the release. Another favorite of mine for 2023 was the ending to a trilogy that I was able to finish early on in the year, Return of the Trickster by Eden Robinson. That is the third book in the Trickster trilogy. I believe I've talked about it on the channel before, but I don't know if I gave that a dedicated review, and if I haven't, then I will definitely do that in 2024 in terms of things, because it was such a wonderful cap off to Jarrett's respective story and narrative experience. I love the writing. I love the bits of humor, and being able to just be able to see the conclusion of that. And it was I had highly anticipated picking that up at the beginning of 2023 to be able to finish up the series, and it definitely met and exceeded my expectations for it. I really enjoyed it. and I definitely name it as one of my favorites of 2023. And then the last book that I'm going to mention is one that I'm planning on doing a dedicated review on the channel for this year. I did not have the opportunity to do so in 2023, but I did mention in terms of my enjoyment of this respective book, and it's my first read from the author, and I feel like it's a book that really doesn't get a lot of praise. It has gotten some praise in terms of booktube, in terms of people who have introduced me to it and have been talking about it in terms of things, but I still feel like it doesn't get the same kind of attention that it really deserves for the quality of work that it is. But Daughters of Jubilation by Carolee Cawthron was definitely one of my absolute favorites for 2023. And to have such a strong character voice, the way that it chooses to use magic and the powers of the heroine in terms of what she goes through and everything else that transpires in that novel was just done so masterfully well, and I appreciated it being able to follow along with that journey. But I'm gonna talk and dig a little bit deeper in a full review of Daughters of Jubilation in an individual video. And I'm thankful to the people who kept putting this book on my plate, saying, you gotta read it, you gotta read it. But it was definitely one of my, I gave it a solid 5 out of 5 stars. Like, it was one of my, like, if I had to name 2 books of 2023 where I was like 5 out of 5 stars, like, you know, like these both, they happen to be both YA, it would be Daughters of Jubilation and the Sunbearer Trials. Both of those were very strong works in my opinion, and I really appreciated being able to read even all of these 7 books among my best list for 2023. So for the most disappointing, these were reads that I picked them up, thought I was going to get one experience out of them, and unfortunately it did not pan out the way that was anticipated. I think one of them is pretty obvious in terms of things. I did highlight it in my mid-year kind of overview for last year in terms of things. When I first finished, and it was the first book of the year that I finished, was Holly Black's Book of Night. There were so many great ideas in Holly Black's Book of Night, and I think it's going to be the first of a duology if I remember correctly, but the execution of it left me baffled in terms of how it chose to focus on certain things while others it kind of skated the detailing of it a bit. I was really disappointed in terms of the level of promise that it has for being an adult urban fantasy, and being Holly Black's first adult urban fantasy. I would have thought it would have met the challenge a lot more for what it offered. So I am planning to read the follow-up of that particular book, but unfortunately it did disappoint me, and it was one of the ones that I would say, yeah, for 2023 it was one of the more disappointing reads that I had. The other most disappointing read that I'm going to put on here, and it's just one other book that you could probably already tell it's one of 2 books. It's not my worst, but it kind of leans into, like, if I had to choose between 2 books that I would make my worst list, I would say that it would be this one that I'm about to name, and the other book that I am going to name as my worst read of 2023. But this one, like, considering the fact that I read this book and Yellowface in the same year, and talking about critiques of the publishing industry with respect to how they treat BIPOC authors specifically, Yellowface was way more effective in terms of what it chose to do and the way that it chose to do. And some people may be mad about me, mad with me about pointing out this fact. I think Yellowface was very effective in terms of the way that it chose to mechanically talk about these respective issues and being able to illustrate these respective issues. I think Zakiya Dahlia Harris's The Other Black Girl tried to do something like this in terms of being a dual critique as well as an illustration in terms of the Black experience, in terms of publishing, and in terms of things for that, but its execution was not there. And that was one of the things that disappointed me about this, like in terms of pacing, in terms of the way that it spent too much time on certain details, which made the story ultimately drag out for longer than it should have been. Among other issues within that narrative, it dropped the ball on several different points. So I would say that definitely The Other Black Girl was one of the more disappointing reads of 2023 for me. And people had warned me going into it, Rosa, this is going to be a rough read for you in terms of things, and it absolutely was. I was kind of prepared ahead of time with what some people had told me about it, but then there were other parts of it that I was not prepared for when I picked it up. But I wish it had been better. Like, some of the ideas that book had on paper seemed better, like in terms of how it was put towards paper, but for the execution of it did not work for me. And I think I'm not sure if I'm going to pick up the Hulu series for it, because I already know what the story is going to be like. I don't know how the execution of the TV series, or whether it improves upon what was presented in the book or not. But if you have seen the Hulu TV series, like, feel free to let me know, like, in the comments below, in terms of what your reflections are for it. But yeah, I would say that The Other Black Girl was one of the more disappointing books, if not one of the worst books that I picked up this past year, which leaves me with my officially named worst book of 2023 in terms of this year, and it was released this past year. And I think if you've seen my other videos in terms of how I talk about this book, it is YA. And I think part of the reason, like, I put it as my worst list is knowing the audience that it is illustrated for, and knowing the execution and what it chose to focus on. Just really, even thinking about it right now, like, just makes me heated in terms of what it chose to do and why, and just asking, why would you even do some of the things that the book was done? So The Black Queen by Jimada Emil is my worst read of 2023. I have a dedicated review of this book on the channel. I have talked about it already. I had gone back and forth between that and The Other Black Girl in terms of what to name as, whether to name it as disappointing or whether to name it as worse. The fact that it does not do justice to the agency of Nova through that book, as well as choosing to redeem a character who does so many different terrible things in the respective of the novel. And the original cover of it was so, like, you know, like, it was I went into it thinking, based on the cover of it, like, in terms of stuff, that this was going to be a centered experience on Nova, on her death, and respecting that in terms of things. But I thought the execution of it just did not work. And even now, I think thinking about the events in that novel still has me heated. I thought that the audiobook was masterfully read and performed. That is what made me give it 2 out of 5 stars in terms of the overarching rating for that. But I would say the actual story itself, if it did not have that, if I had not read it in audio book form, I probably would have given it lower in terms of things. But it was such a disappointing experience in terms of being able to, like, especially with the crop of, YA horror and YA mystery thrillers, in terms of how well some authors do that. The fact that was done the way that it was done just was disappointing to me in so many different respects. But I will leave it at that to not get as long-winded. But I would say The Black Queen by Jumana Mo was my worst read book of 2023. And so that is it for this respective video. Very condensed version of my reading year for 2023. I'm hoping that for 2024 it's a lot more productive and that I can talk about all the wonderful books that I'm able to pick up this year and meet my respective goals. I set my overarching reading goal for 2024 to be 75 books. If I read more than that, will be awesome. But I knew that based on the reading year in terms of everything that I did for 2023 to kind of temper my expectations going into 2024 and then being able to see where I can take it from there. But though that's my overarching video of all the books that I read in 2023, my best, my most disappointing, and my worst. Thank you for watching. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, hit the subscribe button, and hit the notification bell to be informed of when I post new videos. Thank you again for watching. I hope you have an absolutely wonderful day, and I'll see you next video.